college student murdered in a city park, pleading guilty and sentenced tonight.
A teenager who beat another teen to death will spend the rest of his life in prison.
New at 5, a teenager has been found guilty of killing his girlfriend's little son.
While teenagers are commonly associated with causing trouble, their misbehavior typically involves impulsively storming off or sneaking out during nighttime. Nonetheless, there exist a select few audacious individuals within this age group who have escalated their actions to incredibly shocking extents, perpetrating heinous crimes. Let's explore the profiles of the most perilous 15 teenagers and how they adapt to life behind bars. Number 1. Aiden Von Grabo. Aiden Von Grabo, a 15-year-old boy, killed Michaela Grote by attacking her with a knife in her family's apartment in November 2017. This tragic event shocked the neighborhood, and people desperately sought answers and justice. Police caught Von Grabo shortly after the crime, and multiple witnesses positively identified him as the attacker, placing him at the scene. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the district attorney's office quickly pressed charges against Von Grabo, arguing that he should be treated as an adult in court. The judge agreed, initiating a high-stakes legal battle. Von Grabo faced several charges, each carrying severe consequences, and ultimately received a life sentence. Surprisingly, his defense team tried to blame the acne medication, Accutane, for his actions. They argued that Accutane's history of side effects, including depression and aggression, might have influenced Von Grabo. However, this defense strategy was unsuccessful, and throughout the trial, Von Grabo showed little remorse for his actions. His behavior demonstrated more fear of his impending sentence than genuine regret for taking a life. Number 2. David Myers. A Buffalo teenager committed a terrible act, as described by the attorney of David Myers, a 19-year-old who appeared before Justice Christopher Burns in handcuffs. Myers admitted his guilt and confessed to second-degree arson, revealing that he had killed Brian Dominic, a 52-year-old, by setting fire to his home in South Buffalo. Myers expressed remorse in court, acknowledging that he could never fully make amends or undo his heinous actions. It was revealed during the trial that Myers and Dominic had been arguing prior to their fatal encounter, shedding light on the motive behind the crime. As the sentencing phase concluded, the severity of Myers' actions became evident, leading Justice Burns to impose a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years in state prison. Myers was visibly upset as he addressed the judge, fully realizing the gravity of his actions and the consequences he would now face. The community was left shocked by the horrifying nature of the crime, and while the punishment brought some closure, the impact of this senseless act of violence will be long-lasting for all those affected. Number 3. Chandel Jackson. Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old, died after being attacked by Chandel Jackson with a gun during an attempted robbery. Jackson and his partner, Derek J. Thomas, specifically targeted Potter even though he did not have any money. Jackson was ultimately found guilty of the assault and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, Jackson's lawyer asked the judge to consider his youth and lack of impulse control, but this plea was overshadowed by the dramatic events in the courtroom. Members of Jackson's family insulted and taunted the grieving family of the victim, causing further pain and anguish. The emotional impact on the Potter family was evident, especially on Nathan's 13-year-old sister, Sarah. She expressed her fear and confusion during the chaos, thinking someone was trying to harm her parents. She sobbed as she remembered her brother's loving nature and the sleepless nights that followed his tragic death. Number 4. Philip Chisholm. In October 2013, an alarming incident took place in Massachusetts when Philip Chisholm, a 9th-grade student at Danvers High School, committed a shocking act that shocked the town. Chisholm, who was then 14 years old, brutally attacked and killed his 24-year-old math teacher, Colleen Ritzer. Ritzer, known for her positive attitude and dedication to her students, had asked Chisholm to stay after school that day, unaware of the terrible plan he had already made. As the school day came to an end, Chisholm followed Ritzer into a restroom where he subjected her to a horrifying ordeal. The next morning, Chisholm was apprehended by the police with Ritzer's blood on his hands as he had made no effort to clean them. This damning evidence proved his guilt to the authorities. Following this horrific incident, the legal proceedings resulted in a life-changing punishment for the teenage offender. Philip Chisholm was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The courtroom was filled with intense emotions. Chisholm himself appeared shocked and speechless during the trial, while the victim's father, Tom Ritzer, expressed profound sadness and regret for not being able to protect his daughter. He vividly recalled searching for her at school, accidentally driving past her in the woods, and the anguish of realizing he could not undo what had occurred. Number 5. Roxanna Sikorski. Roxanna Sikorski, who was 15 at the time, received a 10-year prison sentence for plotting to harm her own family. This scary incident occurred in October 2014 when she tried to attack her sleeping sibling. The courtroom was filled with intense emotions as her parents, the intended victims, pleaded for leniency. Throughout the proceedings, Roxana's family supported her and presented her as a deeply troubled child with a difficult past. They revealed that she had been adopted from Poland and had experienced trauma before being manipulated by her 23-year-old partner. They questioned whether she fully understood her confession, which was later dismissed, as well as the implications of her guilty plea and the plea deal itself. Roxana's mother expressed concerns about her daughter's understanding of the plea agreement and the motives of her current lawyer. The family's hired attorney had planned to appeal the case, arguing that Roxana's limited understanding could serve as a test case to challenge Michigan's practice of trying minors as adults. When Roxana heard her sentence, she burst into tears and expressed remorse for her actions. The defense later argued that Roxana's traumatic experiences in the Polish orphanage and her biological family, combined with external influences, contributed to the unfortunate turn of events. Number 6. Shanita Latrice Cunningham. Shanita Cunningham and her accomplice, Erica Butts, faced the consequences of their horrendous crimes, which resulted in the death of a child named Serenity Richardson. The severity of their actions was emphasized by the life sentences they received, leaving no doubt about the gravity of their offenses. As the disturbing details of Serenity's ordeal came to light, the courtroom was filled with an eerie silence. Butts and Cunningham subjected the young girl to acts of savage brutality, causing assistant managing solicitor Elizabeth Gordon to struggle for words during the trial. It was discovered that this abuse occurred over a 2-week period, with the assailants claiming that it was in response to Serenity having an accident. However, the extent of the victim's injuries clearly revealed that the pair were well aware of the harm they were inflicting. When sentenced to life in prison, both criminals reacted by hyperventilating and collapsing to the floor, while their family members cried out in anguish. They had to be escorted out of the courtroom due to their emotional distress. Elizabeth Gordon, an experienced prosecutor who had witnessed numerous atrocities against vulnerable individuals, declared this to be the worst case she had ever encountered. The lifelong imprisonment of Cunningham and Butts sent a strong message that such heinous crimes would never go unpunished. Number 7. Conrad Shafer. Conrad Shafer faced the consequences of his actions when he received a life sentence at the young age of 18. In 2013, he was involved in horrific incidents that resulted in the deaths of 2 innocent individuals. The tragic sequence of events began when Shafer fatally shot David Guerrero, an innocent man who was on his way to catch a bus to work. Shafer's brutality did not stop there. He then participated in a home invasion with 3 other friends, and during this ordeal, he took the life of another person. Shafer pleaded guilty, which led to his punishment. Although he could have received up to 40 years in prison, the judge decided to impose an even harsher sentence, 2 consecutive life sentences. In the courtroom, Shafer offered a feeble apology to the victims' relatives, who were overcome with grief. He expressed remorse for his actions, acknowledging their wrongdoing. However, the victims' families found his apology inadequate, as it could never fill the void left by their loved ones. One of the victims' aunts expressed her own sorrow, wishing that Shafer could truly understand the suffering he had caused. Prosecutor Jeff Ashton echoed the family's sentiments, emphasizing the necessity of keeping Shafer imprisoned to protect the community. Under the weight of his punishment, Shafer hung his head, visibly shocked and burdened with guilt. During the investigation, it was found that Shafer had persuaded his father to purchase a rifle and ammunition for him. Testimony from his mother highlighted his early struggles with leukemia, suggesting that it had hardened him and heightened his temper during his formative years. while his father faced legal consequences, including incarceration and probation. It was ultimately Conrad Shafer who paid the ultimate price. Number 8. Jennifer Mee. Jennifer Mee, also known as the Hiccup Girl, was found guilty of killing a 22-year-old man in a dramatic courtroom scene. The verdict meant she would face life imprisonment without parole. As the decision was delivered, she broke down in tears, causing emotional outbursts from family members on both sides who stormed out of the courtroom. Jennifer's mother, distraught by the outcome, was unable to witness the verdict. However, when she finally entered the courtroom, she saw her daughter crying. Despite her belief that Jennifer was not the one who pulled the trigger, the jury convicted her of first-degree murder. The prosecutor argued that she had planned the crime and encouraged others to participate in a failed robbery. Jennifer had hoped for a lesser charge, but now confronted a lifetime behind bars. The victim's mother expressed her grief to the media, emphasizing that no matter what occurred, her son would never return. She wanted the focus to remain on the victim and acknowledged the lengthy and arduous journey to attain justice, thanking the state for its assistance. Jennifer's mother, filled with sorrow, left the courthouse surrounded by family members, declining to speak to reporters. Defense attorney John Trevina, who had represented Jennifer, also refrained from commenting on the case. The possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison without parole weighed heavily on Jennifer. The trial and its conclusion were pivotal moments in this story, offering closure to some individuals while reopening wounds for others. Number 9. Jacob Morgan. Jacob Morgan, a 17-year-old autistic individual, could not control his tears as he faced a 15-year prison sentence for the tragic events that occurred in March of 2015. Morgan confessed to starting a fire that resulted in the death of his 14-month-old half-brother, Joshua. Despite his family's unwavering support and claims of innocence, the court found him guilty. Morgan's mother, Julie Dover, passionately protested his guilt in court, standing by his side in a poignant display of parental love. His parents argued that Morgan had tried to rescue Joshua from the flames, but was stopped by concerned neighbors. They claimed that Morgan, who struggles with developmental difficulties and basic literacy skills, had been coerced into confessing during an unrecorded 5-hour interview. Morgan had provided inconsistent explanations for the fire's origin, initially stating it was an accident caused by a pillow near a radiator, but later admitting to intentionally burning a cushion and throwing it. Fire investigators discovered evidence of 2 separate fires, one in the living room and another in Joshua's bedroom where he was sleeping. Prosecutors also revealed that Morgan had previously ignited another fire on the property just 2 weeks prior, expressing a fascination with fire and a preference for tea candles. Number 10. Raceland Martin. 17-year-old Raceland Martin stood before Judge James Ammons in Cumberland County Superior Court for the murder of his grandfather, Joseph Emmett Nolte. This shocking act, committed with a hatchet, had a profound impact on the entire town. Martin took responsibility for his actions and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Despite his status as a juvenile, the prosecution chose to try him as an adult to ensure justice was served for his heinous crime. Under the circumstances, the judge had the authority to impose a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole. However, considering Martin's age at the time, 17, he decided to grant him parole after 25 years. At the sentencing, Martin was visibly overwhelmed with grief, sobbing as the prosecutors described the extent of his grandfather's injuries to the court. The courtroom was filled with shock and fear, and Martin's hands trembled as he took a sip of water. The defense attorneys aimed to paint a distressing picture of neglect and instability in Martin's family, hoping to shed light on the complexities of their relationships. They accused Martin's parents of abandoning him for years, leaving him to fend for himself. They emphasized how Martin sought solace in dark books and stories about criminals, which were incorporated into his homeschooling education. According to his defense team, his immaturity, mental instability, and peer pressure all contributed to his actions. As the court proceedings unfolded, it became evident that family dynamics played a significant role in the tragedy. Finally, the judge handed down a sentence that considered the severity of the crime alongside Martin's age at the time. Number 11. Gavin Ramsey. A tragic discovery was made during a search for answers in Wadsworth, Ohio. In April of 2018, Howard Leisure examined his elderly aunt's home in hopes of finding clues about her whereabouts. When he opened the closet to look for her prized shoes, he was overcome with shock as he discovered the lifeless body of Margaret Douglas, connected to a single shoe. Ramsey, the culprit, was convicted of strangling Douglas in January of 2019, forever staining the peaceful neighborhood. Realizing the severity of his actions, Ramsey was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. As he heard his sentence, he became emotional and nervously bit his jaw. The Douglas family participated in the event to bring attention to pending legislation at the time, advocating against life imprisonment without parole for teenagers who commit serious crimes. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain as the legislation passed. Wadsworth's police chief, Randy Reinke, described the Douglas case as the most horrific crime he had witnessed in his 28-year career. He couldn't comprehend the wickedness that drove Ramsey to commit such a heinous act, describing it as a mysterious darkness that consumed the young man's soul. Gavin's mother, Christine, shared her son's struggles with mental health and her attempts to seek help through counseling and medication. During the trial, Ramsey disturbingly revealed his intentions in a notebook, leading Christine to believe that her aunt was just the beginning and that there might be more future victims. Number 12, Dylan Shoemaker. Dylan Shoemaker, who was 16 at the time, was entrusted with the care of his girlfriend's 2 young sons while she worked. Unfortunately, a tragic incident occurred, resulting in the death of his girlfriend's child, Austin, just before his 2nd birthday. Shoemaker was arrested, and during the trial, it became evident that the situation was emotionally complex. Although Shoemaker professed his love for Austin and claimed he never intended to harm him, the court found him guilty of 2nd-degree murder. Despite his desperate attempts to sway the jury with tears, the state Supreme Court Justice M. William Bowler condemned Shoemaker as a manipulator and deceiver, sentencing him to 25 years to life in prison. However, in a surprising turn of events, the Court of Appeals later reduced Shoemaker's sentence to 18 years to life in February 2016, giving him some hope for eventual freedom. Nonetheless, Shoemaker continues to be closely monitored by the state, even if released, to ensure he remains under control. Currently, at 26 years old, Shoemaker reflects on the weight of his actions and the irreparable harm he caused from within the walls of the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York. Please share your thoughts on the sentences given to teenage criminals like Dylan Shoemaker in the comments below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Number 13. Damon Kemp. Damon Kemp, a 19-year-old who was accused of killing his teenage friends, was sentenced to prison without the possibility of parole. Kemp's reaction during his bond hearing in court was extremely dramatic, causing concern among the relatives of the victims. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, with tears welling up in the eyes of friends and family members who had been affected by this dreadful tragedy. Narissa Carter, sitting in the front row, was completely overwhelmed by emotion as she mourned the loss of her 19-year-old son, Trey Ingram, who was brutally murdered. The grief became unbearable for her, prompting her to briefly leave the courtroom, a familiar situation for any grieving mother. Kemp's behavior during the court proceedings heightened the somber atmosphere as the judge announced his charges and sealed his fate. He began shouting and invoking a higher power, which only added to the already perplexing nature of the case. The judge denied Kemp's bail due to sufficient reasonable cause for his arrest. As the tears and cries escalated from Trey's family, Kemp's family and friends were eventually escorted out of the courtroom. Kemp had been arrested in connection with an armed home invasion, according to the grim facts. The authorities never disclosed the motive behind the shooting, as both families were still reeling from the tragic deaths of their loved ones. Number 14. Jaleel Smith Riley. Jaleel Smith. Riley was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole in 2003 for killing a young woman and severely injuring her partner. The families involved in the case had conflicting emotions about the sentence, feeling that it was both insufficient and overdue. The sentencing hearing was filled with emotional outbursts, with Smith Riley even collapsing at one point. Despite Smith Riley's efforts to withdraw his guilty plea and avoid the death penalty, Judge Charles Q. Becky dismissed the request and imposed the maximum punishment. Smith Riley's family requested a more lenient sentence, highlighting his lack of criminal history before that fateful night and their belief in his potential for rehabilitation. On the other hand, the victims' families urged for the harshest possible punishment. The mother of Portia Brooks, one of the victims, expressed her belief that Smith Riley had taken her daughter's life and stated that it was time for her family to find peace. She acknowledged that the road ahead would be tough, but she was determined to move forward with the support of her family and in memory of her daughter. Smith Riley's lawyer mentioned that he had never seen a client try to retract a guilty plea in a criminal trial, advising against it due to the serious charges and their consequences. As the proceedings concluded, the families left the courtroom with mixed emotions. While the punishment marked an important step towards closure and healing for the victims' families, it also left them with complex feelings.